So, welcome to a special edition of No Choftes. I'm Stel, as you know. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Don't forget to hit that like. Smash it. Smash the like senseless. Now, someone smashed our stream yesterday, and I don't want to go into that. I'm not going to talk about it. Before I bring in our guest, just want to talk briefly about the press conference that was held earlier. Nothing really much to say because everything that JJ said, I expected him to say, talking about the Cypriot League, talking about the club, doing his research, blah, blah, blah. Some journalists even had the temerity to ask him, which players are you looking at? Come on now. Don't be silly. But anyway, we'll delve into this a little bit later. I'm going to bring in our guest. He is a Balkan football expert. He's going to tell us all about Novica Erakovic. Richard Wilson, welcome to the show, mate. How you doing?
I'm good. Yourself, man?
Yeah, all good. Thank you for joining us at short notice. I know I sent you that message yesterday evening, and I really appreciate you taking the time out to talk about this new signing who we haven't unveiled yet or announced, so it's all conjecture at the moment, but it looks like he's joining Omonoia. What can you tell us about the lad?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I mean, you don't often see anyone really bought out of the Montenegrin league because it's a terrible league. Not to put too fine a point on it, but Erakovic is a player who's been a step above it for, I would say, a couple of years. I started following him, scouting him in 2020. And in that time, he's evolved his play. When I first started watching him, we were looking at him really as a proper anchor man of a midfielder. Over the past 18 months, he's moved further and further up the park, and you've been able to see that with a quite incredible return. It was 14 assists this past season. I think you do have to caveat that with Montenegro is one of the worst leagues in Europe, but this is a player who was being followed by sides in France, followed by sides in Belgium. I think he's chosen quite well to move to Cyprus because it's not so much of a step up that it risks being back in Montenegro in 2 years' time, which is what we see a lot with young players from the region. But it's still a big step up, and it's still a big challenge for him to develop to reach that level.
The thing is, there are lots of questions surrounding not only the player, but how the deal has come about, because Cyprus is a very, explosive region when it comes to transfers. We've seen many clubs throughout every summer, they will release 10, 11 players and bring in 10, 11 players. Omonoia, our structure has been very strange recently in terms of the type of players we've brought in. A lot of questionable signings, a lot of questionable departures, a lot of questionable decisions made all around the club. So when this news broke yesterday, it came as a surprise, obviously, because this player wasn't a name on anyone's list. No one knew who this guy was. We still don't know who he is. But also, when we look at the personnel that we have in that area, not only defensive midfield, but from an attacking perspective, at the moment, well, prior to Monday, we had Mix Discarud, who's since been released. Fouad Bashiru, that's been a revelation for us. He came from Malmo. Kasama was our big money signing last summer for $1 million. He's flattered to deceive so far. Then there's the two Cypriots, Gusulo, our captain, and Humbo. Then we have Roman Bezos that played in Belgium as effectively he's our number 10 now. So this player that we've apparently signed, listening to what you just said about him playing as possibly a number 6 and number 8. Number one, we don't know how he will be deployed. And number two, as you quite rightly said, in terms of the quality, how will he perform in Cyprus?
I think it's a very low risk bet. His performance, both as a holding midfielder and deployed further up the park over the past 18 months, has been more than good enough to deserve a chance outside of Montenegro. Now, I was expecting him to go to France. I know there were clubs in League Two that were after him, which to me, as I say, makes it a bit of a strange move, purely because it's not where I expect him to go. When you see players move from Montenegro, they're tending to go into big youth systems, or they're going to Central Asia. to get paid an awful lot of money in some oil state, of which obviously Cyprus is neither. But as I say, I think it's very low risk. The salary demands that you would have from Erakovic will be extremely low compared to anyone else you'd be able to get in that area. Like obviously you mentioned Discarud and others. He will be on far less than half the salary. So as a cheap bet to develop that a little bit and become the player that they want him to be in terms of being a first teamer, I think that's a very sensible bet to make, and it's one I'd be making in their position too. Albeit I say that as a very big fan of the player. And it's a region you want to have your fingers in, to be honest, because there are really only two clubs in Montenegro that are any good in terms of Budućnost and Suceska, and being able to get into that market quite early, having those levels of contacts in the region, and by having the contacts in Montenegro, then you're able to improve your links in Serbia as well. It's a positive thing for a market move for the club. In terms of fitting into the side, it's the move I wanted to see him make. So he's going to be able to get that exposure potentially at Conference League, group stage, and then just at the sharp end of another table. I mean, what you don't want to make as a move for a young player developmentally is you make a move to a side that's struggling, maybe, to a side that's more focused on keeping things out, being very structured. You want to be able to be in a side that's going to have possession, that's going to be able to dominate games and be able to develop you in a more relaxed atmosphere. And I think that's the reason he's made this particular move, because rather than getting lost, and we see a lot of players from the region get lost in big youth academies, he's going to be getting first team football. Like I say, there's plenty of options in that area of the park for you, but certainly if he's getting 10 appearances from the bench across the season, yes, that might not seem like much, but that's probably more than he would get if he was moving into a larger system in Western Europe.
I've been watching some clips on YouTube, and it's very difficult to gauge how talented a player is based on YouTube, because they can make any player look like Messi. I'm not going to lie. Great filters, all that kind of stuff. But what I did notice, there was two things. First of all, his anticipation. It's almost as if he can read a pass to intercept. And the second thing is his one-touch pass. He's very good at switching balls from left to right and right to left in terms of his feet. So I think this is something that's very important for the Cypriot League, because especially on transition, when you're playing on the counter-attack, you need that player that has got that in him. So in terms of his overall ability, what do you think are his key strengths?
I think you've picked it out there well. Is that ability to anticipation, but then also his ability to process the ball quickly. And that's probably is why he's been so effective this past season, because he's got those skills of an anchorman, of someone who's been, I'd say, a number 6 sitting behind the midfield, and the focus of his role has been cutting out through balls, getting stuck in with physical challenges, because it is a very physical league in Montenegro, but then also moving that ball, cycling it through to attacking players more quickly. Now, when he's moved up the park, say that those skills in recycling the ball, you're winning it higher up the park, you're able to move it to the wingers rather than the fullbacks, and get the side onto a positive footing far more quickly. It's obviously helped this past season. They've had a striker in Tyrone Conrad at Suceska who scored a ridiculous amount of goals. And it always makes creative midfielders' life a lot easier when you're able to rely on the person in front of you to actually put the ball in the back of the net. But I would imagine moving up the league, the request for him from a coach perspective will be more on the defensive abilities of his game rather than necessarily the attacking ones. I think the attacking ones are probably not necessarily given a bit too much hype because, like you say, of YouTube videos, but I think they're probably given a bit too much hype because of just the level of opposition he was playing against. I do see him long term as a holding midfielder, and there's no doubt about that. But having those abilities, as I say, to move that ball around quickly means that if he's needed to step in further up the park, then he's able to. And as I say, being able to get that development through first team appearances at this level is something that's also going to solidify him into the national team setup going forward. He's already got 4 caps and has looked perfectly capable at that international level. And there's space for him in the national team to really make a place his own there for the next decade.
Well, it's quite interesting that you mentioned not only the national team, but also his position long term, because again, going back to those clips, and part of those clips I've seen, he kind of reminds me a bit of Nemanja Matic, in terms of his distribution and, as I said, the intercepting and the movement, protecting the back four. So he's got that awareness to spray a 20-yard crossfield ball, which is great, especially when we're playing with wingers, but also for the national team. And as we know, with our club anyway, we like to hold on to players that represent their national team, regardless of how good or how bad they are, because we know the club makes money from players going on international duty. But on the flip side, I see this player as one of those Moneyball effect kind of individuals, in the sense that we'll get him developed and then sell him on to perhaps a club in France or Belgium, which we've done. We sold a player last year to Sporting Kansas, and we've had younger players go to Eintracht Frankfurt, etc. So I think ideally for us, we'll have him, we'll develop him, we'll get him some good games, some good statistics to build him up, and that way we can possibly sell him on. But Richard, based on your experience knowing that league and people within that league, I'm trying to understand how this move actually came about, because we don't actually have a scouting system. I'll be honest with you. We've got a sporting director now, but we haven't really had a scouting system. So are we talking about agents possibly getting involved? Because we do have players from the Balkan region playing for us. So do you think there's a connection there? Do you even know who his agent is? I'm intrigued to find out more about this. It's a bizarre one, a good one, but it's a bizarre one.
Yeah. I think it's certainly helped that he's free. And that sort of has been his situation for the past couple of seasons as well. It's come to the end of the season, his contract's been up, and then from an agent's perspective, he's been looking around seeing, do I have an option there, or is my best option staying here? And I think they've taken it on a very short-termist level. From working in the region, it is very, very, very much agent-led, and much more so than it is club-led. So it's you have to have those links to really get ahead, particularly Montenegro and the southern Balkan states as well. I mean, not just Montenegro, but also Albania, if you're looking at Kosovo as well. It tends to be very, very interlinked in terms of who's doing business there, and having that Rolodex of telephone numbers is a really big help, because at the end of the day, most of the transfer business nowadays is just done on WhatsApp.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you. Because I've been telling these lot for a long time that I've seen WhatsApp messages from our vice president asking for specific players in specific positions. So yeah, there you go. Thank you for reinforcing that theory.
You're very welcome. Particularly when you're going cross country, though. You have to have that link 24/7 to be able to speak to people before you are necessarily making the direct contact with clubs and things like that, because you, from a scouting perspective, you're not just looking at is someone a good player, you're looking at is someone a good personality as well, which again with Erakovic, there's absolutely no real dispute about that. He's not someone who's going to embarrass the club or anything like that. And also, from as you say, from Cypriot football can be quite explosive. That's something that if you're in the Balkans, you're playing in big rivalries. Suceska against Budućnost is, it's not a rivalry that immediately pops up to most people's minds, but it is a very big game locally, and it brings out the lunatics. If we're entirely honest,
You haven't
as
seen
so many big
Cyprus
games.
yet, mate. Honestly, you haven't seen Cyprus yet.
Yeah, so he's so I think he'll have a bit of knowledge of what to expect. And I mean, hopefully it is something that you're able to see the club use going forward. Not necessarily in Montenegro. I don't think there's that many breakout players there. We saw it last season with Djukanovic going from Budućnost to Sweden. As a similar player, I had someone asking me about another player at Suceska as well, Tunisian lad, Saidi Wali. I think about that right. In terms of him potentially moving on as well, but there are how I like to describe them as immature leagues in the region. Your
Mm.
Albanias, your Kosovos, where there's actually some really good players there, but because it's not necessarily been that stable a place for that long, what you tend to see is people haven't really gone in there from a scouting perspective to look at it too much yet. So whereas it probably would settle maybe at around the level of a Montenegro, in your coefficient table, on the edge of being in those preliminary rounds of the Champions League or not. For now, you still have players who are a level up in those leagues. And we've seen a lot of them be successful in Turkey, in particular. Valmir Velju, Jepmir Topali from Kosovo for 2, and Julian Shkuka going from Partizani to Metz this year as well. There's definitely value to be had there. There's definitely the talent there for it to be worth looking. There's just there's an awful lot of rough there to have to find the diamonds.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I guess it's the same with most regions. And there's a comment here from Mario. He said, if I'm not mistaken, JJ, our sporting director, said he knew the player in today's press conference. I didn't hear that bit, but maybe you did. Maybe I skipped past it because they were talking a lot of waffle a lot of the time anyway. But this to put things into perspective, Richard, our new sporting director came from Hammarby in Sweden. So if he's aware of the player, and I know you mentioned moments ago that there is a player that's gone to Sweden from the league in Montenegro. So
Djukanovic from Budućnost, yeah.
So there is that awareness that these players. So perhaps it was a Jesper Jansson signing, which is looking good for us. But the question I will ask, and this isn't me trying to be a pessimist or a skeptic in any way, shape, or form. But you said that there were French clubs looking at the player. And I'm one of these people where I say, well, if this player is so good, why hasn't he joined these clubs that were supposedly interested in him? Because these clubs are bigger than Omonoia. Let's get it right. Let's call it like it is. So why did he not end up in France? Why has he ended up at Omonoia?
It's a very good question. And if I had the portal into his brain, I think the answer is development. I think there are, so as I hinted to, there's so many warnings of players moving from the region going to France, and then you just end up getting lost. Because at the end of the day, we know if you're coming through an academy in France, let's say, you've had absolutely brilliant coaching from 12, 13, all the way through to 21. And if you're coming in from somewhere that's not had that coaching, you've got the culture shock for one. That's going to be a damage to adjusting, and then you've also got to adjust to having those new great facilities and having a place where the floor is much higher than it is in these smaller leagues. And I think it's been such a big hindrance to a lot of players, and not just for Erakovic moving on, but you can name like Bruno Petkovic, who's obviously scored in the Nations League finals tournament. Before he was at Dinamo, he was at I think it was Verona, and was brought in there young, and he just had to get out because he wasn't developing in the way he was. And when he was originally signed for Dinamo, people were like, "Why are you bringing this guy in? He's spent years in Italy, basically just sat on his backside playing Call of Duty." But you need
As
those
you do,
right,
as
exactly,
you do.
yeah. But you need those. One of the big things for players is to have that presence of mind to know what development environment you need to be in and to have that advice. A lot of people are getting the advice, move early and let's see if we can get, you've got a short career, get the money while you can. And if you get something going a really good deal going for yourself in maybe Serie B, League 2, then you can get noticed. But the competition's much harder, and they don't tell you that bit before you make the move. So I think that's the key for me is knowing that he's going to be able to take firstly a step up in level to improve his own development, but then also a step up in level where he's going to get game time to improve his development. And that's what you need between 18 and 22 is just playing games and having that match intelligence. I think that's such a key reason as to why, Jesper Janssen indicating that he's scouts in that region. He does it quite often. Aljosa Matko went from Slovenia to Hammarby not too long ago and came back a couple of years later, a better player for it. But, you're getting players who are Erakovic's age who've got 100 appearances under their hat already. And you cannot teach first team football on a training pitch. At the end of the day, you can't teach the speed. You can't teach the speed of mind. And that, to me, is what really separates the great players from the very good players, is having that game intelligence to have the presence of mind where you're able to make those decisions more quickly and make those decisions more correctly more often. And that's where that gradual development and knowing that you're going to be able to get appearances for Erakovic. Yeah, I mean that's almost sort of like a little philosophy lecture.
No, I
from me,
appreciate it.
as much as
Honestly,
you ever
it's incredible because the thing is, mate, I'll be honest with you. We do things very different on this podcast to everyone else in Cyprus. I'm based in London, but obviously our viewers at the moment, all 37 watching live on YouTube, they're out in Cyprus. And every time we sign a player, I try to bring on someone that knows about them. So, for example, we've had Roman Bezos when he's joined us. I got Andrew Todos from the Ukrainian Football Podcast. So we try to do things a bit different. Match previews. If we're playing a team in Europe, like we've got Gabala in the Conference League qualifiers. I've got a journalist from Azerbaijan. So we do things very different. And to hear your perspective and your thoughts, it's much more, knowledgeable. It's much more informative than other journalists would perhaps do in Cyprus, rather than just looking on Transfermarkt. No disrespect to them, I know it's different. It's very difficult to get that information. So what you're doing is providing our viewers with the information that they need to know more about this player, because clearly it is an exciting prospect knowing his age. He's not a 31-year-old player that players you join in the Cypriot clubs. They're usually at the tail end of their careers and whatnot. So we're signing a player that's got a lot of potential and a lot of ability by the sound of it. Now, I was talking to a coach that was at Stuyetska. He's now coaching in Libya at the moment. And he told me about the player's personality. He said he's a great player, but he's also a fantastic guy. Now, knowing that he is a top bloke, we're not going to have a hoodlum in the squad, put it that way. And I think it's also going to help him that we do have players that are from a similar region. We've got Miletic that is from Serbia. We've got Adam Lang from Hungary. We've got Lesiaks from Czech Republic. I think they might be the only three players from that part of the world that we have in the squad now.
And I think for Miletic, just with you mentioning him, one of the clubs who sort of quite for a long time linked, and I know he's been on trial there. He'd been on trial at Partizan, so they probably have actually crossed paths with each other in the past from those younger levels.
And there you go. It's going to help. And I think also there's a lot more Balkan players in Cyprus, and they all talk to each other. Some of them actually live in the same apartment building. It's quite funny because I was speaking to one of them. And he said, "Yeah, this one lives on the first floor, that one lives on the third." And they just meet up. So it's great. So yeah, I'm excited to see what the future holds for this player. I don't expect him to come into the team and hit the ground running. As I said, we've got a plethora of talent in the middle of the park. So I'm interested to see his game time, how much he'll play, who he'll play against, how he will play. So yeah, I think right now we're coming to a different stage in the club's history. We had issues up until the back end of last week. I mean, I don't know if you know, Richard, but our president resigned last week due to outside influences, be it the association at the club, but they've apparently resolved their issues and he's coming back, and it's great for us because he's pumped money into the club, and he even said when he resigned, "You owe me 16 million." And I think that put them that made their asses fall out, so they had to react. So him coming back potentially which I guess is going to happen. JJ coming in, being announced, signing a player straight away, and apparently a couple more signings are going to be announced in the coming days. So it's looking positive. And I think for the player, his development, he's at the right club. We have been known to produce players, not only from the academy, but to bring in players, get them developed and move them on. So yeah, I've got some questions here actually, which I'm going to bring up from the views. I'm not going to take up too much of your time, because I know you're a busy guy, and I appreciate you coming on.
It's all right.
Let's have a look. He'll be having his medical in the evening unless another Zay. We're not going to talk about Lamkel Zay again, Mario. We can't do this. This is done. This is a player that came over to Cyprus, Richard. He was meant to have a medical with us. He came to Cyprus. The club announced that he's coming to Cyprus. He went into a hotel, changed his mind. The club got pissed off. He left. So anyway. Richard, how would you describe his personality? The player's personality.
Yeah, I mean, you've hinted at. I mean, one of the things that you go through as a scout, particularly when you're trying to gauge someone, is just pouring through their social media and doing a bit of stalking, which isn't necessarily standard. Yeah, it's not necessarily a very positive thing for us to be doing, but you can tell a lot by doing it, and generally the negative stuff tends to jump out pretty quickly. There's never been any suggestion that he's anything other than a model professional. And I think even you just look at the guy; he's very clean cut, and he's sort of come through. He's come through a level where you have to have that sort of talent, that sort of personality to be able to get through and to have the common sense to actually know what moves to make. I think the fact that he's stayed in Montenegro that little bit longer isn't necessarily a judgment on his playing ability. I think it's more a judgment on knowing, having a single-mindedness, having a drive, and knowing what he wants. I think the players you tend to see go very early are the players who also tend maybe not to be the most mature.
Well, put it this way, he's still young, and Cyprus has a few distractions. Although, look, I'll be honest with you, this club, the camaraderie within the camp has been incredible since this head coach came in February. He's completely rejuvenated the squad. He's galvanized them. All right, our league campaign wasn't great, but we won the cup, which we had to win it, because we're not winning anything would have been a disaster for us, not only financially, but in terms of the future of the club. Mm-hmm. So I think he's joining a club where we're on a high at the moment. Things appear to be back on track. There's stability, or so it seems. There's a structure, or so it seems, which is more than what we can say. We were saying this a year ago, what the hell's going on with this club? And finally, it looks like we're getting somewhere. So I think for his personal needs, in terms of settling at the club, he's not at a club where it's dysfunctional. So it seems, again.
Yeah, that's. I mean, there's plenty of dysfunctional clubs in the Balkans. I mean, everyone lives with a lot of debt and a lot of uncertainty in terms of whether your salary is coming in at the end of the month, which has been a big thing throughout the region, particularly in Serbia. We're not that far away from, I think it was FIFPro once came out and said to players, don't sign in Serbia, you won't get paid. And Montenegro is a poorer football environment than Serbia, so similar applies. And that's not for a lack of hard work behind the people running the clubs. It's just the nature of things, unfortunately.
Great stuff, mate. Well, Richard, thank you ever so much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I'm pretty sure you have one eye on Omonoia this season.
I will do, yes.
Lovely. Well, boys and girls, if you're on social media, follow Richard on Twitter at HYFPRW. You have a Yugoslavian football history podcast?
Yeah,
I'm not mistaken. I'll give you a chance to plug that. I didn't give you the chance at the beginning. My apologies. I'm sorry. Where are my manners?
It's just the History of Yugoslav Football podcast, which is more than just history, going through football in the region from the 19th century to the 21st, and then also a lot of talking about just what's going on in the region as a whole, from Slovenia all the way down to North Macedonia and Kosovo, covering what's going on at the minute. And generally, there's quite a lot of nonsense going on. So I think for Cypriot football fans, there's probably quite a bit of kindred spirits there. Yes.
It'll be relatable. It'll be relatable. Well, boys and girls, I've put the Spotify link in the live chat. I'm going to put it in the description again here, guys. You can see it's right here. It's all numbers and this and that. But as you can see, there's the proof that I've put it there. So feel free to subscribe to it. How often do you record, Richard?
Whenever I have a spare minute, which is generally quite quite sparse at the minute, but
understandable.
Yeah, hopefully getting better. I think I've got the unfortunate problem that basically every league is starting on the 21st of July this year. So trying to get season previews done for everyone is going to it might kill me. Trying to do 8 of them in one go.
And do you collaborate with other podcasts as well? Do you do crossover shows and everything?
I've not at this point. I mean, do try and get so from coaches in the region and things like that, but it tends to be more like this when you see players from the region moving, because like you say, it's a region which isn't really covered very well in English, in spite of the fact that almost everyone in the region speaks English.
There's
that big contradiction, but because it is a region people don't really know things about, as you say, having myself available, who is sad enough to watch a few hours of low quality Balkan football a week, is always
nothing wrong with that, mate.
There's exactly.
Nothing wrong with that, as long as you enjoy doing what you're doing. Well, Richard, mate, thank you so much for your time.
League.
Thank you very much. This is what I keep saying. I'm not one of these Premier League snobs. When people talk to me about the Premier League, I just switch off. I can't be bothered.
Exactly. I'd
rather watch A-League. I'd rather watch the Australian League. For me, anyway.
It's
more goals.
Nothing wrong with the A-League. It's on at a nice time in the morning.
Exactly. In the grand final, I had 7 goals. Come on now.
Yeah.
Well, one team got 6, but anyway, it is what it is. Well, boys and girls, thank you for tuning in. Thank you for watching live. Don't forget to hit that like button, that subscribe button. And we'll be back very, very soon, because I know that there's going to be a lot more going on. We've got a lot more content planned for the coming weeks. I'm hoping to make a major announcement in the next few days. I'm not sure if I can say anything, and I can't actually, because I've signed an NDA. But
he's a new manager.
I'm gonna leave. Well, God, well, it wouldn't surprise me. It wouldn't bloody surprise me the way that things happen in Cyprus. But yeah, so boys and girls, thank you for tuning in. Don't forget to follow Richard on Twitter. We'll listen to his podcast. It's absolutely top. And we'll be back very, very soon.